What is going on, everyone? Jonathan here with the Venue RX podcast, and I'm joined today by Shay Minter. Shay runs bar programs, venues. He does a lot of different things. We actually had his wife, Kristen, on the show a little while back, and through that discussion, I discovered something really cool that they specialize in, adding bar programs to venues. And so I wanted to have him on the show today because I know many of you venue owners may be considering doing this and may have some questions about it. So I'm excited to welcome Shay onto the show. Shay, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, how did you get into the wedding and events industry at all?
Well, it's several years back now. We kind of had an idea, along with some partners, to open a wedding venue. We knew absolutely nothing about it, how to run it. We spent a long time going through a design process, which you probably talked some about with Kristen some about that when she was chatting with you. Through that whole process, we had to kind of stumble along the way and teach ourselves the right way to do things. It was something that Kristen wanted to do. We had recently moved to Houston from Austin. We were kind of trying to decide if we were going to stay in Houston, go elsewhere. The opportunity to start the venue came up, and so we kind of dove right into it.
Awesome. Cool. So do you have a background then in owning your own business, or is kind of entrepreneurship something that's always been a part of your story, or was this jumping out kind of the first time that you've ever done this?
This is the first time we did it. Kristen and I had been looking at some other opportunities previously. Nothing ever came to fruition. This one was the first one that did. Historically with my family, we've had, small businesses, but this was the first time Kristen and I dove into one.
Awesome. For me, I know when I first started my business, I actually kind of came into entrepreneurship kicking and screaming. I thought that, what was always modeled for me was, you go to school and get a good degree. The better the degree, the better the job you'll be able to get. And then, you can kind of make your way in the world based off of the educational platform. And at the end of school, I realized that I wasn't a super great student. So my prospects probably weren't very bright on that side of things. Yep. But Shay, you're located out in Texas. Is that correct?
Yep. We're based in the Woodlands, Texas, which is north of Houston, kind of a far north suburb of Houston.
Awesome. That's a really beautiful area from what I hear.
It's nice. We like it.
Very cool. So now the venue, so with Venly Design, you guys, and this is the venue design company that you guys started together. You specifically focus on helping other people design their venues. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And the design process that we do with Venly is a bit more kind of all encompassing than like a typical just kind of standalone design company, because we incorporate the kind of operational knowledge and aspects of that business type into the design process. So instead of just designing a beautiful building, which is important and one of the things we do with that company, we also make sure that all of the operational considerations that, a typical design company that's not familiar with how to operate a business in that building, may not consider. So we incorporate that throughout the whole process. And in terms of layout, people flow, programming, but also, knowing, what sort of investment level makes sense to, achieve a return, have healthy cash flow. So we inject all those considerations into our design process with Venly as well.
That's incredible, because I feel like with a lot of design companies, they may just focus exclusively on the aesthetic and how everything looks rather than this flow. And you're totally right. One of the things I loved about the conversation with Kristen was that, when you think about a wedding or event venue, it's one of those things that truly does have to be functional, or you end up with service issues that end up being a big problem for the property owners. So it's kind of neat. So then explain to me the transition. How did you go from, so you have the venue and then you have, what you do with the design stuff. At what point did you start adding in bar programs?
So when we were going through the design process for our venue, initially, we were going to do the venue only business model that Kristen probably talked about, where other vendors come in for all of the other kind of activities. And as we're going through that process, we, kind of discussed, well, do we want to run the venue bar? It's a profit center. It's something that is, happens on site. And we kind of went back and forth on that. And I think if I recall correctly, I probably pushed pretty hard to do it. I think, and rightfully so. And I think a lot of people are this way. It's like, hey, I'm just starting this one business. Do I really want to, inject the complexity of adding something else to it at the same time? So I think the deal I made with Kristen was, okay, we'll do it. If we're going to add the bar on from the beginning, then I'm going to have to handle it. But we did that, and I think we're really pleased that we did. It's important to make that decision early because there's additional spaces, additional licensing requirements, and some additional planning in your business process to consider. It's a harder thing to add on later. So yeah, we decided early on that we were going to do that.
I'm interested in some of those processes, and I know it's probably different from state to state, but I wanted to ask, how much did the thought of liability play into the decision to add it on? And, your kind of ability, if you're the bar, you can cut the liquor service off or the alcohol service off.
Right.
If things are getting too crazy. Was that a big determining factor in your mind for why you wanted to take on this specific vendor category?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It definitely was, but the initial kind of thoughts through everyone's head was kind of different from what you described. It was more of, what liability are we bringing on ourselves by doing the bar service? The way you described it I think is the right conclusion, and we eventually got there, which is it is better and less risky to manage that on our own instead of having someone else come in that we don't control. And there are legal avenues and insurance policies that you can use to mitigate your personal risk associated with doing that activity. So you can kind of put that risk in a box, insure against it, and then also take control of that activity during the events. And I think it ends up being, just as you described, way less risky to do it yourself. And then you end up with a new profit center too.
Absolutely. Do you find that staffing that is a easy add-on to the current staff that you have to have at the venue, or does that get complex because you're now having to inject a totally different category of employee, more of a food and beverage type employee into your environment?
So we've self-trained all of our bar staff. We started off initially using a staffing service, but very quickly transitioned to completely recruiting, training that team ourselves. And really what we did is we created kind of somewhat of like a career progression path for our other staff. So people may start working as, floor staff in the venue, and then the people who do a great job with that can have opportunities to be a bar back and a bartender. So it's been, I think, a positive thing for morale for employees working there. And doing it that way has really made it not all that difficult to staff.
Do you, I'm curious, like with adding this bar program on, it sounds like you and Kristen had this discussion around like who's going to run it. Do you have a bartending background? Do you drink? Of course, I've got to ask you, whiskey, are you a big whiskey guy? Beer?
I drink really boring beer, so I'm not a alcohol connoisseur by any means. We had no background in bartending or food and beverage service at all, other than going to some in college.
Totally.
So yeah, it was a bit of a leap, but once we figured it out, it's of all the things you could add on as sort of an ancillary service to a venue, it's one of the most straightforward and one that makes the most sense to pair with the operations you're already doing.
Definitely. If you were to choose between adding a bar, so you talked about, ancillary services, bar versus having rentals on site, which one would you choose?
I would definitely choose the bar.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. I had a couple of reasons for that. It's a lot easier to order the sort of custom inventory of exactly what people want when it's a consumable item like alcohol, or a beer or a beverage or whatever. Whereas rentals, people don't like the inventory that you have, they're just not going to use it. So you can customize better, and really you don't have any, your startup costs are minimal compared to accumulating a catalog of rentals. With the bar, you're just ordering what's required for the upcoming events that you've already been paid for in advance in general. So
got it. And that's
a cash flow perspective, it's easier as well.
Yeah, that's a huge difference in cash flow. On the rental side, you have to amortize the costs of, all the equipment over time. There's breakages, there's all these different things. You're totally right. That does make a lot of sense. I was asking that question about the experience thing because I think there may be a lot of venue owners out there that are not specifically comfortable with the bar themselves. And so they don't feel like because they have a background as a bartender or in hospitality that, they would feel a little bit scared, maybe anxious about adding that on, but it sounds like you were able to figure that out, and it really made a lot of sense on paper. And then you could just kind of put the pieces together. So you do this for your own venue, but now you do this for other venues as well. How do you go about doing that? How is that transition?
Yeah. So, there are a lot of people who just don't, they're like, hey, look, I think it's a great idea to add on a bar. I don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it. And so we found a couple people in our area that were like that, had some conversations with them, kind of talked through the business model, and kind of offered basically to partner with them on running and managing that component of the venue. And so, we set up a separate legal entity that, is the bar operating company. Either partner with them on that or sign what's called a concessionaire agreement. And there's different ways to legally structure that. But basically through some mechanism, partnered with the venue owner, and we say, hey, we'll handle everything that's required for the bar operations. You don't have to worry about it. You just get a check every quarter. So that's appealing to a lot of people who, really don't want to take on any more day-to-day responsibilities. Alternatively, people who want to, we are soon about to launch a series of online courses and some in-person seminars on, all aspects of venue design operations, and the bar add-on is going to be one of those for people who want to take that on themselves.
That's wonderful. That definitely seems a fairly straightforward, like when you're describing it like that, it sounds pretty straightforward, but I know that, people still may have, questions and hesitations. Do you have to get a liquor license to do this?
So there are a couple different approaches, and it's going to vary by state and even like jurisdiction within each state. But, the general answer is if you want to, operate it as a, bar service where you're selling the alcohol to the guests, you're almost always going to need, some sort of alcoholic beverage permit. And we have that at all of our facilities.
Got it. Makes sense. Was that extremely hard to get? And I'm asking because I know again, things are very specific, but in our area, I mean, I've heard it's extremely hard. I've never actually tried to get one for any of our venues, but I've heard it's extremely difficult.
Yeah, it can be in some areas. And, when that is the case, it may make more sense to just do the bartending service, as opposed to, actually purchasing and selling the alcohol. You kind of have to look at each situation on its own. And, in the jurisdictions we're in, it's a process for sure. We have an attorney who navigates that for us to make sure, all the boxes are checked and everything's filled out correctly, so it goes smoothly. It generally takes several months, 2 to 6 months in most Texas jurisdictions. Other states can be easier, and there's other states that you mentioned, where you are. It may be prohibitively expensive and time consuming to do it. So you kind of have to look at each location, each situation to determine what the best course of action is.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. As a staffing company where we came from, oftentimes we came in and we would help out with the bar programs. They would start the bar program at the venue, they would run it, but then it sounds like we were actually in that position where you initially were using a staffing company. What led your decision to switch over from using a staffing company to actually doing everything on your own?
Control over the staff, honestly. We wanted to make sure that we had, people that were familiar with our venue and our process, people that we could train on our own. The staffing company was great to help us start up for sure. And in some instances, it may make sense to continue with that, indefinitely. In our case, as we kind of were just trying to run it as our own company. And as we started to see that we had the ability to kind of recruit in-house for people that were doing a great job in other positions and train them up, we decided to transition to doing it on our own.
That totally makes sense, especially as you're starting to spread out and do other bar programs as well. Talk to me a little bit about the format and the structure of how you operate this now. You have multiple venues now. Are they all in the Houston area?
Generally, yeah. I mean, they're all probably within an hour or so drive from each other.
Okay. So fairly close. Do you have, is how you operate it, liquor for each event gets on site prior to the actual event itself based on guest count? Or do you kind of have some sort of central warehouse that pushes all of the supplies out for every single wedding?
We keep inventory on stock or on site at each venue. Some of that's driven by the rules and regulations of the liquor permits that we have. You kind of have to have it delivered from a distributor directly to that site, and it can't leave that site. So we do it that way. Our wholesale distributors make deliveries each week in advance of the event. We kind of have a base level of supply, and then we have kind of custom items that are delivered for each event that's going to be happening over the weekend.
For these venues, do they typically have food and beverage offerings as well? Like, are they more all-inclusive type venues and you're just taking on the liquor side of it? Or are these blank canvas venues?
They're generally blank canvas venues. Some of them have all-inclusive options, but none of them are a full, required all-inclusive type venue.
Okay, that makes sense. Here in the Southern California area, I think we may be in one of those cost prohibitive areas where, it's getting a liquor license is more based on a lottery system. And then we also have pretty strict requirements by the ABC here for how liquor is served in conjunction with food. So if you're a restaurant or you have some sort of food operation, then it's a little bit easier to get a liquor license add-on versus going the other way and just specifically doing liquor. There in Texas, I know there's different laws, and like you said, different jurisdictions even within the states. But Texas has some interesting ones, like you're not allowed to purchase alcohol on Sundays. Is that correct?
So that goes county by county.
Okay.
There are some time restrictions on alcohol purchases. Charge this real quick. But you can sell alcohol on Sundays. It generally has to be in conjunction with food. We actually have an FB permit, food and beverage permit. At our facilities, we were able to show that, this isn't a shop bar. There is food served at these events. It looks a lot like a, kind of restaurant style service. Everyone's eating meals. So ours are permitted with that in mind, as opposed to just a standalone beer, liquor, wine only. We have the FB certificates as well, which allows us to serve on, Sunday, for example.
Totally makes sense. Were there, I guess I should ask, what things surprised you as you started doing this? Because coming from not really knowing much about bartending per se, maybe it sounds like you came from not really an experienced food and beverage background, which I think is going to be encouraging to a lot of people. But were there some things that surprised you early on, or even now as you've begun to develop these systems?
What surprised? I mean, I think at the beginning everything surprised us. I'm trying to remember what specifically did. Once we got into it, I was pleasantly surprised by how systematic we could make it. One of the concerns was, if every event has different, desires and different requirements, is this going to be like reinventing the wheel, every weekend? And that doesn't have to be the case. It's definitely a way to kind of systemize the whole operations. So we were pleasantly surprised that worked out. There are probably more like record keeping and kind of rules to follow as we learned about it, and some of them feel arbitrary because they're just specified by the ABC. So, that was probably one of the things that I learned a lot about. I was like, wow, okay, there's a lot more to keep track of here. But again, once you make it a system, it's not overwhelming.
Were you surprised at all with the insurance requirements, kind of as the insurance requirements were, increasing, I assume, because now you have maybe your general liability would go up, or, were there some surprises there?
I was actually surprised that, in Texas, it's not even required for bars to carry what's called a dram shop insurance, which is basically liquor liability. We do at all of ours. I think it's the responsible thing to do. I was very surprised that wasn't required by law. In my opinion, probably should be. I think most places do, but I couldn't. I was very shocked that you don't have to submit proof of that in order to get your permit. They're in general terms, it's best to set up your kind of bar operation as a kind of standalone entity. So on paper, it looks like it's a completely different business. You keep all of your liability associated with bar service in that box, and you insure it. Yeah, so it has a separate general liability policy, and then if you carry dram shop insurance policies, and keep your payroll over there, so you have additional workers' comp insurance policy. So there is another round of insurance that's required.
Definitely. Okay. I would love to get into a little bit more of the specifics of actually setting up a bar program, and maybe even a little bit of a teaser for, some of the content that you're going to be putting out. I know venue owners like the idea of adding a different profit center, right, into their business. And whether that is rentals or bar, this idea of being able to increase, how fast they can pay back, their loan or whatever is definitely something that's interesting. So how would you go about starting this? Let's say someone's listening to this, they've toyed with the idea, boom, they hear you, Shay, on the podcast, and they're like, this is it. I'm going to do this. Where should they begin this whole process?
Yeah. So I think the very first step is to understand kind of the regulations and Alcoholic Beverage Commission kind of requirements and process in their area. So, if you're looking to start a new venue and build a new one or buy one somewhere, and you're still looking for site selection, if you want to add on the bar, understanding the differences between what you can and can't do at each different jurisdiction is a key consideration. Even in Texas, which is generally an easier state to obtain that permitting, there are some counties where you can't. There are some counties where they won't let you kind of consider the catering that's going to be on site as food operations, and they don't allow standalone bars with no food service at all. There are ways around it. It makes it more complex. And if you already have a venue, step one, understand what is the process to, obtain that permit at a venue that's already operating. During the application process, there can be some restrictions on alcohol service while your permit's pending. So that means you were a BYOB venue, and now you have a pending permit, and now all of a sudden you can't serve alcohol, or people can't bring alcohol in because you have a pending alcoholic beverage permit. So you definitely want to find, and again, there's ways around that too, but you definitely want to find out what does that process look like, and what can and can't you do in the area that you're located at.
How do you find that out? Like, is there a person that you go to find that out, or is that just Google search, or what are folks doing to get that done?
My recommendation is to find an attorney in your area that specializes in dealing with the Alcoholic Beverage Commission. We've done this multiple times. I still pay a good attorney to help me with the process. To me, there's just too many risks at missing something to do it on my own. You can do some quick background research, but if you go to the Alcoholic Beverage Commission website for your state, you'll be able to read all kinds of regulation. But the reality is, it comes down to how tightly the ABC enforces them, how it follows them, how the sort of that bureaucracy functions. And someone who deals with that entity day in and day out is going to be much more efficient and effective than you will on your own. And generally, they're not going to, they'll do usually an initial consult with you for very little money or free. And, for when we're working on these projects, we have basically a site evaluation performed by that that attorney for less than $1,000.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's not super cost prohibitive to kind of get this process started. I'm glad I asked you that because I feel depending on who the business owner is, right? They might just march right down to the local, ABC office and, announce their intent to have a bar program at their venue. And I know depending on the county, depending on, the jurisdiction there, that may not be looked at very favorably. So, definitely having a attorney, someone who knows how to position you makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Were there some tips that you could give people after they're actually, so let's say they get their permit, they are now past that whole stage of, the paperwork and all that. Right. Operationally, are there some tips that you could give people as far as how they're actually setting up the operations of getting this thing going? I mean, hiring bartenders, inventory, any of those things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you're going to definitely need to have your point of sale system set up, your inventory kind of control process set up. You're going to have to make sure you go through and understand how you're going to deal with cash management, right? Because you're going to have, people paying with cash. You're going to have people with access to a decent amount of money in cash drawers. How are you going to make sure you maintain control of that? And, hopefully you hire good people, but make sure that no one's stealing. Mm-hmm. That's a major problem at bars is our bartenders stealing money. Understand your process for that. And then, from a systematic perspective, how are you going to talk with your customers, your brides in advance about what they want, plan through that process? How are you going to estimate what their, we hadn't talked yet about it, but how are you going to charge for alcohol? Are you going to charge per person? Are you going to charge per drink? Are you going to allow cash bar? What are you going to do there? What's your program going to be? And then how do you message that, communicate that clearly to brides in the front end? Once you're operating the bar, part of your tour process is going to have to be explaining how that works, because people are going to want to understand what is the requirement of this. How much am I going to have to pay? Because you're saying your venue, you do the bar. So tell me what the costs are. So all of your menu pricing systems, all of that is really important to have worked out in advance before you announce it, because you don't want to have a bride come on a tour and ask you about bar pricing and you can't answer the question.
Totally. Especially if it sounds like when you're maybe a third party who's being added on as a bar program. It sounds like there's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen. Shay, let's move to that, because I think there is, like you said, and like we've kind of alluded to, there's so many different ways to do the bar, and certainly from the back end, but from the front end, how the consumers, how the couples are looking at us, and the brides and grooms are making a decision. Before we get into that, did you get any pushback? Or have you gotten any pushback when you're moving a venue from maybe a BYOB type of environment into having the venue actually do that? Was there, from the sales side of things, did you feel a switch or any sort of pullback in consumer interest?
So we actually did have a venue that started as BYOB that we sort of converted. And the way we managed that process was that we basically said, okay, anyone who already has a wedding booked, like, you can't bring your own alcohol into the business anymore, but we're going to do it for you at cost. You're not going to pay any sort of markups, and we're actually going to make it easier for you, because you're only going to have to pay for what you use. You're not going to have to deal with scheduling security and bartenders, and kind of explain to them how actually we just made their lives a lot easier. And then going forward, there will always be occasional pushback from people who, know that going to their local grocery store, a beer costs, X dollars, and now you're selling it for more than that. And, want to understand why that is. And just like any other part of the sales process, and people wondering why you charge so much for a certain date, it will come up, talking through it in a way that you explain the benefits that they're getting, as well as, just not just the price you're charging them, but like, hey, when people have BYOB weddings and they run out of something because they only brought so many bottles of some type of liquor or so many beers and now they're all gone, that's not a good guest experience. Doing it this way, we keep more than enough inventory. You're not going to run out of something. You're not going to have to worry about how many beers need to be bought from the store and dropped off in advance. You don't have to mess with any of that. And yeah, there is a markup on what we on what we sell. But at the same time, you're only, with our model, there are options where you're only paying for what's being used. So you're not going to have 50 bottles of some white wine that no one liked left over that you have to figure out what to do with afterwards. In the meantime, you ran out of red wine an hour and a half into your wedding. It won't happen to you. So that's a benefit there.
Got it. That makes so much sense. And I feel like when they hear, some of the education that you provide, if you poise it in that way, then probably they're way more excited, maybe, because now Uncle Jimmy doesn't have to go out and, do a beer run or whatever. And I know I've been at so many different weddings where that's happened, cocktail hour, they rip through all of the vodka and it's like, okay, someone go for ice, someone go for more vodka. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So let's pivot then. Let's talk about pricing and how you build things out. What are some common pricing models that you've seen work?
So, okay, first step with that is kind of understand the market that you're in, right? So kind of look at what is common in kind of in the location where you're sort of operating. And then there are two, like, kind of, I suppose, like, primary directions you can go. You don't even necessarily have to pick one. You could do both. One is X dollars per person. You pay however many people are coming to your wedding, you pay that much per individual, and here's the tiers of alcohol that you can have for that. That's simpler from you being the venue owner or bar operator's perspective, but it also can in my opinion, complicate the front end sales process of just booking the date with somebody, because people are going to go take $35 a person or whatever it is common in that area, multiplied by their guest count, which when they're touring is typically they're thinking they're going to have more people than end up coming. And they're like, oh my gosh, now I'm making a much larger decision to book this venue. Because I'm deciding I'm going to pay 35 for whatever the number is per person, plus the cost of running the venue, and their decision-making process can get can take them longer to make that decision because now they're locking on both of that. What we generally do is, we have a kind of a fixed, what we call like a bar setup fee that says, hey, that's going to get you bartenders, that's going to get all kind of the, condiments and mixers and kind of everything that goes along with the bar, security for the event. It's all covered by this. And then after that, they have the option to not pay anything else if they don't want to. Guests can come up and just purchase drinks, and it doesn't cost the bride anything more. They can pick a dollar amount that they want to host. And once that money's out, it can turn into a cash bar, either for mixed drinks or for your wine, or they can host everything. And they can pick what they want their bar to be. They can decide they don't want liquor at all. They can decide they want to have, 3 kinds of beer, 2 kinds of beer. We can make it fully customizable for them. We explain it in a way so it doesn't sound confusing and overwhelming. We explain it in a way that, it kind of alleviates their concern of, like, don't worry, there's not a decision to make when you're booking the venue. You can make that decision. We work with you to customize exactly what you want later. Don't worry about it today. And all you're locked in on is the bar setup fee. So that seems to work pretty well. It gets your venue booked, and it kind of puts the bride's mind at ease so that they're not, afraid that they just lock themselves into a $25,000 bar package without understanding what the pricing is. Like, okay, I only have to pay this setup fee, and if I can't afford anything else, then that's okay. I don't have to worry about it. So that alleviates a lot of those challenges.
I was going to ask, in the first pricing model where there's kind of a fixed per person price, to your point, let's use, $30 per person, let's just say, that does seem like it could get pretty expensive pretty quick. Right.
Yep.
And so when you're considering those two different models, when you think of that fixed pricing model, how do you account for people not showing up, guest count shrinking, things like that? Is that a major issue, or have you ever seen that side work? Because as I'm hearing it, I feel like that fixed pricing model is probably the hardest one to even make happen from the venue side of things.
So some people want that. Okay. Some brides they're like, look, I want everybody to have drinks all night. I don't want to worry about what my bar tab's going to be. I want to pay X per person, and I don't want to. In fact, at our wedding, we had an option to just pay per person or to pay, whatever was consumed. And it's like, I don't want to sit there during my wedding and wonder, how much money is being spent at the bar over here and what my bill is going to be at the end of the night. Give me a price per person. I pay in advance and then I'm done. And everybody can drink whatever they want to. So there are people that prefer that. And like I said, we did. I think it ends up being, you end up spending more money that way, but I didn't want to look at the bar and wonder like, oh my gosh, there goes another $10. There goes another $10. So like, some people want that. Yeah.
You were walking up to your guests, say, hey, I think you've had a little enough here. Maybe just take a little 5-minute break here. You know, my wallet might be hurting.
Yeah, exactly. So we offer that model for people that want it. But then we also offer the model of, look, if you're concerned about, your guest count shrinking, people not showing up, half your family doesn't drink, just go with consumption model. You only pay for what people are drinking, and you don't have to worry about whatever your guest count is. Whoever, if your wedding happens and everyone decides they don't want to have a single drink during the entire thing, you're not going to pay for you won't pay for anything. So that offers people options. They can do what they most prefer and what makes them most comfortable.
Do you find that people are pleasantly surprised when they use that model, kind of the pay-as-you-go model, rather than the fixed cost model? Or does it go both ways?
It can swing both ways. We have a lot of data now on what consumption looks like for different events and different days and different guest counts. So we can do a pretty good job of estimating what that's going to be in advance. And in most cases, people are getting refunds at the end of the night, which makes them happy. So yeah, that tends to work pretty well. It can swing the other way though. You every so often run into a.
Oh no, I was going to say, explain that process really quick before you get into something you run into. But so a refund, how would that work? If they paid $30 a person and then they paid for 200 people to show up, but 200 people, it was only 120, whatever. Is that when you give a refund, or are you talking about with the other model where it's pay as you go?
Yeah. So when we do a price per person, there aren't refunds based off, we don't want to count heads. Yeah. We know how many tables and chairs, how many chairs are set up, what's the capacity of the room configuration. And that's what they pay for. If half the people don't show up, we order and staff for what we were told. The refund situation happens when we put together an estimate for a bride that say, I want to host everything for my 250 guests, and I want to have these beers and this, this wine, these alcohol options. So we'll say, hey, we think based off of that, your fully hosted bar for the night is going to cost X dollars. And then as the event's happening, we're tracking every drink in the point of sale system. And if she doesn't spend all that money, the balance is refunded back to them. So they pay in advance the deposit of what they want to, what they want to host. And if it's not all utilized, they get a refund at the end of the night. That's
cool. And then I bet conversely, they would pay over if, they rip through a couple extra bottles of whatever, another pack of beer or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. They have the option. They can continue hosting if they go over their estimate, or we can just start selling drinks. They don't have to, the bar doesn't close. They can either keep paying for it. And, honestly, a lot of times what happens is when there's an overrun or something like that, and we end up going to a cash bar, someone will often, family member, someone's like, hey, I'll cover the rest of it. And so like an uncle or whoever will say like, hey, here's my card, keep the bar open for everybody. Not open, but keep it hosted for everybody.
Keep it rolling. Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. That's really cool. As far as POS systems, what do you, I bet you must have a pretty robust system to deal with, the intricacies of all of this. Is there something specific you like using? Are there a bunch of different options?
There are quite a few different options. I wouldn't say any specific one is the right one or the wrong one. I prefer the options that you don't, some of these point of sale systems will lock you into credit card processing for some duration of time at a certain rate. That's not my preference. I like the flexibility of if I wanted to move or renegotiate that card processing fee, I can do that. I'm not locked in with some, equipment that only works with that processor. So I like, we have, iPad, we put an app on it and it brings up your point of sale. And if I, for some reason, decide I don't like that point of sale company anymore, I don't have a bunch of equipment that I can't use. I just put it on a new app.
Yeah. New iPad, new app. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, I prefer that. And I would say, you need some sort of inventory control system, some sort of system that allows you to manage, what your catalog of what you can sell is. And so a system that kind of integrates that is helpful because you need to reconcile inventory with what your sales were to help you know what to order to get back to your kind of standard like par level of inventory. And there are some good options out there that help you do that.
Speaking of inventory, what happens, or have you had the scenario where a bride, they look at the list of things that you offer and they want something different. There's a small brewery that just opened up and they want to get, the beers from there. How do you handle a scenario like that?
We try to accommodate every custom request like that we possibly can. The only time where it can be difficult to do that is when you have like a very difficult to obtain, Happy Van Winkle 23 or something like that is an example of something that is difficult to get. We might get allocated a couple bottles a year. Like we can't guarantee that we can get something like that for someone. But otherwise, yeah, hey, there's this cool local brewery down the street. Can I get beer from them? At least in Texas, yeah, we can go purchase either directly from a brewery if they're small enough, or we can find their distributor and purchase whatever it is you want to have at your event. And that's, it's important to be able to do that because one of the challenges of an all-inclusive model, as an example, where you're in-house in catering, is it somewhat limits the ability for your client to customize their event. If you have this caterer, they have these options. There may be some food truck that your first date was at that you'd love to have come serve something at cocktail hour. If they can't do that, that is a negative for their event. With the bar, generally, if we can go get anything they would bring themselves anyway, it doesn't detract from their ability to kind of customize and have their event exactly how they want it.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm really realizing how binary it is, like with the alcohol. I mean, you're going to drink the Jack and Coke, you're going to drink, it's pretty straightforward. And, the Heineken that I drink in New York is probably going to be pretty similar to the Heineken that I drink in California.
Right.
So it's fairly straightforward when you think of that. For venue owners listening to this right now, would you recommend that they try to do this themselves, or would a recommendation of yours be for them to hire like a bar manager, someone who actually has experience with inventory and ordering, purchasing, all this different stuff?
I think it comes down to, how much time do you want to invest in it yourself, right? You will eventually, at least in my opinion, you're going to hire someone to help you with that, the operational, the day-to-day aspects of that, unless you're completely an owner operator and do it 100% yourself. But that doesn't necessarily have to be a complete additional person. It may be an existing staff member that helps manage that process for you. It's a matter of how much you want to take on, which is kind of like why we offer two avenues for people. Like, hey, we have some coursework, we have some in-person seminars. You can come out to one of our venues, get trained. Or, hey, we can partner with you and run it all for you. You don't need to worry about it. I think it comes down to personal preference of what workload or level of responsibility do you want to take on, or how much would you like to just offload that for someone else?
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Well, Shay, this has been super interesting. I have a question here as we wrap up. What part of this is your favorite? You personally, like of this whole, because there's a lot of moving pieces, obviously, but what part of this whole adding bar packages onto venues, or even the venue as a whole, is your personal favorite?
I'm the in our kind of group, me, Kristen, I'm like the numbers guy a lot of cases. I really like how when you're making a decision either to start a venue, buy a venue, or while you're running a venue, it de-risks the decision for you because it adds additional profitability. It gives you an opportunity to make some more money, and it makes your investment look better. It makes your operational cash flow higher. It makes the whole process, it makes it less risky because you can offset if you miss on some booking counts. Now you're making another however much money per event from the bar that's going to help offset that. So for me, it makes me feel personally more comfortable opening a venue, starting a venue, when I know I have this sort of extra income stream that doesn't detract from the ability for bride to customize something. It doesn't require me to go buy a, inventory of rentals in advance that I may or may not be able to rent out. And it's something that can be systemized. So I kind of like that about it. I enjoy the the profitability that comes with it, with relatively little impact to your existing systems and the kind of client's customization ability.
Cool. And, it actually reminds me of one more thing that I wanted to ask. As far as profitability goes, is this something that you think really does make a big difference in your bottom line, or is a negligible addition? I mean, maybe even if it pays a little bit. I guess what I'm asking is, when a venue owner, there's so many different things. You could start adding photo booths. You could, the rentals obviously is a discussion we talked about. That obviously impacts cash flow, and there's inventory management and some of the similar things. But as you look across categories, is there a large enough profit margin there to really make it interesting?
Yeah, the markups are pretty substantial relative to your costs. Kind of a rule of thumb, and it varies by market based on what you can charge. But sort of the initial rule of thumb I use when I'm estimating, what's your additional profitability from this, I kind of plug, $750 to $1,500 additional profit per event that you have. And if you have larger guest counts, or if you're able to charge more, you can go up from there. So if you're doing 100 events a year, 150 events a year, that's an extra 150K of net profit after all of your expenses are covered, which isn't so bad.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like that can completely take care of your mortgage, maybe. I mean, like you said, it kind of offsets some of the risk, and for some business owners, especially I think with venues, because would you agree with me that a typical venue owner might be a little bit older? Maybe they're using this as a retirement idea, or maybe it's a family type thing. What kind of profiles do you see generally with the venue owners that you work with?
Yeah. It's trending younger recently.
Okay.
Several years ago, you're right. It was a lot of people who were kind of sort of retiring, or using it as kind of a second career at post-retirement or something like that. We're seeing more and more younger people try to get into it. It's harder, for them to do it, because lenders look at experience, and they look at, obviously, personal financial statements. So they need to find investors, or they need to have enough money to actually do the project. But it's been interesting. I mean, we have, ages of venue owners we work with, but, there's a couple, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and then a couple also that are in, like you mentioned, the typical profile you probably think of, that are, kind of retired from their first career and using this as a retirement job or something along those lines. But it's been surprising the last couple of years how it's been trending to a kind of a younger group.
That's cool. That's really interesting. I know I've seen a mix, but it seems like usually the newer venues that are not having bar programs, that may be more blank canvas venues in our market, at least. I know this is purely anecdotal, but I've seen those trending younger. But then when you're really thinking about a robust, maybe more expensive venue, large property, et cetera, those seems to be people who, it's a second career. Maybe it's a passion they've always wanted to do, that now they're able to do that now that they're retired from their main job. So that makes a lot of sense. Well, Shay, thank you. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing with us some of your knowledge. I'm really excited as you guys are continuing to educate venue owners about this, because like you were saying, it really seems like an incredible opportunity. So you're going to have to let us know when you release this education content, and we'd love to be able to make the audience that we have aware of it, and push people your way as they're looking to increase what their venue is able to offer. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you.